Hey everyone. So now we're going to go over the different types of libraries that we use when it comes to doing mapping online and a couple other small tools. We're going to go over more tools a bit later on, but just getting you familiar with the different libraries that are out there that can help us make maps. So we talked about libraries a fair bit, these JavaScript scripts that we can include when we're making websites that come with a bunch of different functionality depending what we're doing. Maps fall under this, and they have different documentation. They're different from different companies. They have a lot of similarities between them. Obviously, they all have to do with mapping, so they're going to have some of those similarities I talked about in the last episode. But what are some of the key ones? So we're going to go over 4 in at least some detail here. We're going to use 2 when it comes to actually doing the coding in the next section of the course. And for all of these on my YouTube channel, you're going to be able to find like much more in-depth discussions of all of them. I have like 10-minute videos on each of these. So if you're really needing to choose or, get into understanding exactly everything about them, you can look over there, but I'll just try to give a quick overview. So the granddaddy of them all is Google Maps. This is the classic one. People kind of just say Google Maps to mean an online interactive map. So, we've all seen Google Maps. We use it on a regular basis. Now, they have this JavaScript API, which has a whole documentation set up. You can add markers, you can add points, you can add, polygons, lines, all that stuff. You can add pop-ups. All the basic functionality is going to be in here. It's fairly straightforward to learn from a beginner perspective, but I do find the documentation to be really confusingly organized. I find it quite hard to navigate in, and even right now, if I just want to figure out how do I add, there's a marker. Okay, that's not so bad. So they have this thing, markers. Do they have examples? Here's an example. We go to this simple marker. There's an example. So that's not too bad. But I find it a little confusing, this documentation. You can see that what was on the left has now changed. So if I want to go back, okay, there's stuff with rectangles. Anyway, you get the point. We can also change the underlying map more than you might think. There's a special thing out there called snazzy maps, which is basically different styles for Google Maps. You can change how it looks. So Google Maps is nice. It's one that used to be used a lot, but is used less nowadays. But it's a good place to start, and it's very recognizable to people. And there's a lot of just great things that people are really used to seeing, like the street view, and there's some other things like when you do the search, the autocomplete of a search, and the overall aesthetic is very familiar to people, so that can be a plus. Okay, another one that is kind of in the side of easy to use is this Leaflet.js. This one's totally open source. We've looked at this briefly in a previous episode, just looking at tiling and stuff like that. Now, this is different than Google Maps in that it's not run by a company. It's run as an open source thing on GitHub here. We can see there's a GitHub logo. And so it's all here. Anybody can contribute to this. It has lots of issues that are open, and people, open things up and start to make improvements over time. So this has been around for many years, and it's been updated, and it's very flexible for doing pretty much anything you want to do with maps. But it is a little bit less modern in some of the ways that it's coding. So sometimes if you're doing things with many, many millions or many thousands of points, Leaflet may start to get slow. It's the same with Google Maps. It may start to get slow because it's built in somewhat of an older way of doing mapping. It's too complicated to explain unless you really understand this, but think of it, it's a little bit older. The documentation I find is quite good. It's not too hard to, from here, just find out where we want to go. We go find markers. We're going to find some code here, but it does have a lot of extra options that can be a little bit tricky to fully understand. So it's going to take a little while for you to really get used to working around in this documentation, but overall it's fairly clear. For the other stuff like directions and again, type ahead searches and stuff like that, there's a lot of other plugins that people make. So again, since this is open source, a lot of people build things to contribute to Leaflet to add more features. And so you can see here, there's things like routing. There's even a full screen button. There's, other ways to, do geolocation. We're going to talk about all this stuff later on. But there's a lot of other plugins. Now we're going to use Leaflet just because since it's open source and it's kind of similar to Google Maps in some basic ways. I don't want to get into it too much, but kind of the overall structure of how it works is somewhat similar to Google Maps. So I think if you are comfortable with Google Maps, you're going to find Leaflet not too hard, and vice versa. So I want to have that out here. It's really great in the open source way, so you don't have to worry about licensing or charging or any of that stuff. And we'll get into that a bit more later. The next one we're going to look at is called Mapbox, Mapbox GLJS specifically. Mapbox is a company that has an interface for mapping called Mapbox Studio, where you can build your own maps and use lots of data and upload data. But if you want to make your maps like really interactive, so you know, when you mouse over things, pop-ups appear, or there's different layers that turn on and off, or points get added and removed based on what users do. To do that, you're going to have to use Mapbox GLJS. This is actively maintained by Mapbox. So this one does require a sign up and an access token, the same way that Google Maps requires you to have an access token. But it generally has a big free tier, which Google Maps also has. I forgot to mention that. But Google Maps and Mapbox both have like a big free tier. They're basically competitors in this space. Mapbox is a more modern type of mapping library. It can handle many more points. It's much faster than Google Maps in the sense of handling a lot of points, but it's also a fair bit different to learn. So if you are used to Google Maps and then you try to come over and just change a Google Maps map into Mapbox, it's quite different. There's a lot of different concepts at work, and we're gonna go over that. But overall, I think Mapbox is a pretty good option, especially if you're looking to make something very customized, very pretty with a lot of custom data on it. And if you're looking to get into mapping more generally, it's probably not a bad one to learn. I do think for a beginner, it's a lot more complicated. So we're not going to look at Mapbox, but what we are going to look at is MapLibra. And MapLibra is just as complicated as Mapbox. It's just that I want to use something to teach you some of the concepts of Mapbox and MapLibra. And MapLibra is the open source version of Mapbox. So basically what happened is Mapbox used to be open source years ago, and then they changed and kind of closed things so that you have to use this access token to use Mapbox regardless of what base map you load. Before, it could be like if you had your own base map that you hosted yourself, you could just use the library to move around the map and that sort of thing, which you can do with Leaflet. You can just load whatever you want. But Mapbox changed that sometime a couple of years ago. And so MapLibra branched off and basically took Mapbox at that last stage where they were still open source, and then people have been developing it. And it's supported by quite large organizations like Amazon, and I think Microsoft and some other companies support MapLibra. It's having a lot of work done. The concepts, it's basically Mapbox. Like everything is very similar. You can see even the documentation, they've mirrored it. So all the concepts that you learn with MapLibra apply to Mapbox. So if you can use one, you'll be able to use the other. It's almost a one-to-one across the two, with a couple exceptions. So I want to give you a sense of learning MapLibra as well as learning Leaflet, because I think these are the two main kind of forks that there are for doing mapping online. And then based on your project, you can choose the right one. Generally, as a total beginner, Leaflet is going to be a better place to start. And then moving into Mapbox and MapLibra as your projects get like more complicated and you're using them in more types of ways and with bigger data and that sort of stuff. There are lots of other types of mapping libraries. There's OpenLayers, which is another mapping library, but it requires quite a bit more understanding of programming to really get it working. You can see even here the quick start involves a lot of these import things, which we saw don't work just directly in code. We got to like set up a little application in order to make it work. There's also things like Apple Maps with MapKit.js, and these are pretty good, but you know, it's just not as common. This is kind of like if you specifically want to make something look like an Apple map, then you use this. But otherwise, I think these four mapping libraries are really the standards that you're going to be running into out there and that you'll be wanting to use. So again, if you want to learn more about these, I go over them in a fair bit more detail on my YouTube channel, so feel free to check out, the videos about those. But that's probably a good, just basic overview. Lots of options. Mainly choices are around your skill level and the complexity of what you're building, but we're going to go over 2 of them so that you are prepared no matter which comes your way. All right, see you in the next video.